So Judi, how did this connection happen as far as getting in touch with Renee? Did she come to you guys? How did this all come about?
The project was first introduced to me by my producing partner, Tanya Chambers, in 2017. Tanya had been following Renee's career for a while. Renee had experience directing short films and commercials and television, but had never done a feature, and so this was her debut feature film, and she had written it and wanted to direct it. And so Tanya sent me the script. She loved the script, sent me the script. I fell in love with it straight away, and said, it's a no-brainer, absolute, F yeah. And so I jumped on board in 2017, and we shot it in Perth, Western Australia, and Fremantle, Western Australia in 2021.
Let's talk about this Aussie connection, because I actually just interviewed an Aussie playwright who's now in LA, but the Aussie family in LA, in America, in the film industry back home in Australia for you guys, seems like a really wild and funky family. I'm curious, as far as, can you explain what makes Aussies and Kiwis such interesting groups of filmmakers?
Well, I actually have a foot in both camps, because I've been living in Los Angeles since roughly 1994. So, I actually was sort of out of the Australian camp for a while, except in LA. There's a very strong Australian contingent actually in LA as well. But I am now back fully immersed in it, and I have projects in both places. I think maybe what makes us an interesting bunch, and there's an enormous amount of talent and creativity that comes out of those two small, well, Australia's not so small, but it's a very small population on a continent the size of the US. New Zealand's very small. Is a sort of a history of having a very a healthy cynicism for things, a great sense of humour, a real history of a kind of, we can do it attitude. A lot of the development of Australia since white settlement, which has been a couple of hundred years now, brought with it, a real sort of, survivor mechanism, sort of approach to things. It was tough when that settlement first happened, and then we have, if not the oldest, one of the oldest Indigenous communities in the world. They go back 60,000 years. They've survived all kinds of things, including, in terms of ice ages and heat waves and everything else. So I think that's there. And we have a great attitude to kind of enjoying life but working hard. So people love us on film crews, and we collaborate very well. So I think there's a real sense of collaboration amongst the community, and just this, just go for it. Whatever your view of the world might be, you can have a go at getting it out there, in an artistic medium.
Over these last few decades as a producer, when you approach something with Ben, your husband, compared to like this project, is it the same way to approach it for you? Is it different? Is there a different vibe from, let's say, his films compared to Renee's film, or do you approach what you do and what you bring to a film project on the same level, or is each project different?
I suppose overall, I have an approach which is very much a creative producer approach. And yes, every film is different in some way, but in the end, as a producer, you're basically doing crisis management, so you bring the same skills and enthusiasm, if that's the right word, towards crisis management. It's a little different when I'm working with my husband, who's a writer-director, Ben Lewin. If a project, emanates at our place, then I'm there from the very get-go, and I sometimes resign, usually 2 or 3 times when I'm working with my husband, because it's just like too hard. No, stop behaving like a turkey, or I'm leaving the project. But overall, I think, my approach when I look at projects is, where's the audience? Sometimes it's, does it make me cry? Because I think that's for me, that's an important touchstone, not in a truly schmaltzy way, but in a way that is, means that it's actually, reached me beyond just pure entertainment, which I think is fine too. But the sorts of films I like to make address important issues but often bring humour to them. So the films I've done with Ben, although they've been quite a variety, that's what I gravitate towards, and the films I've done with him that I like the most are the ones that do that. And Renee's film was absolutely like that. When I read the script, I knew that this film would do what I think is important in filmmaking, which is to entertain, to inform, to touch people, and to provide something that will give people something to talk about when they walk out. And How to Please a Woman does that in spades.
I think it's going to make business women out of a lot of people out there. I love Sally in this film. I think she's so dynamic. She carries so much of this film. How much fun is it to see an actress kind of own this role and also very much sell a character that I think is very believable, someone who does make a bold decision to change her trajectory? I was blown away by this film. It was not what I was expecting.
Thank you very much. It's not a film, people are surprised by it. It's not a romp. A lot of it's very funny, and in fact, we thought that people would Renee in particular didn't expect people to laugh as much as they do, but it's fantastic to hear an audience laugh. It's one of the things that I love about going to the theatre. It's not the same if you watch it at home in your living room, when you've only got maybe 2 people there, maybe 3 or 4 if you've got them together. But it also, you can hear a pin drop when there are these very sort of poignant moments. Having Sally in that role was just such a gift for us, and an enormous challenge for her, because Sally is accustomed to doing pretty broad humour, and that is her comfort zone. And so going to those places that were really very emotional and almost heartbreaking at times, portraying a woman who feels unappreciated, ignored, and finding a way to come out of that was a new thing for Sally, and I think it's terrific for her because I think it'll open up a whole lot of other sort of opportunities for acting roles for her. But she was fantastic to work with. She's very talented. In my experience, comedic actors can do drama. It doesn't always flip the other way. And Sally was on board right away. She completely related to what we were talking about in the film, about women learning to ask for what they want at work, at home, and in the bedroom. The sense that we're not seen as sensual or sexual or having desires or even something as simple as wanting to be touched as we get older. The tasteless jokes that go around about that we always sort of took on the chin before, that we feel much more sensitive about these days, I think. Excuse me. I think because I'll just start that again. The tasteless jokes that we sort of used to just let slip by. I think we don't want that to be the kind of story that's being told about us now. We really want people to know that everybody has a sense for wanting to be sensual and intimate long into their senior years, and what we found incredibly heartening is that this film appeals across the board, and young women and young guys and the LGBTQIA plus scene. I mean, everybody and men are really responding to it way more than we had originally anticipated, and so we're thrilled by that.
What does it mean then that the people behind Bentonville, Gina in particular, brought this film here, or championed this film? I think it gets to the heart of many of the things Gina's talked about, ageism in the film industry, in the industries as a whole, not just in the film world, but having a lead like Sally dominate the way she does in this film. How much do you get knowing that it is being recognized for that, but also hopefully past that? Like you said, it reaches so many different people.
Well, I had the good fortune to be at the Bentonville Film Festival before with a film last year, Falling for Figaro, and also to have attended in person in 2019. I knew when I read this that this was a film that would be in the in the zeitgeist, in the mission of what Bentonville talks about. Not only if you can see her, you can be her, but that sense of empowering women, of telling women's stories, of getting that kind of inclusivity out there. And so when I sent the film to them, they said this absolutely is on point with our mission, and we'd love to spotlight it. So I was really excited about that, and I think it's terrific to have it here at a festival that really, that's what the festival is about. It's about women speaking up for themselves, women having a voice in the room, women telling their stories. So I feel like this is the best home it could have.
I'm curious, in your work as a filmmaker, obviously Ben's work, I think y'all champion a lot of things. Y'all are a voice for a lot of people. Y'all's work with John on sessions with the telling a story I don't think many people had ever seen, but being able to tell stories that maybe aren't out there into the public. How much do you personally get from your work in just being able to allow voices to be heard?
This is the moment where I do cry. I think it's what I always wanted to do. When I first set out into filmmaking, I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker, and I do work on documentaries as well. The idea that you can make a film that actually moves the needle for people, that can change lives, and it wasn't really what we expected or set out to do with the film The Sessions, but telling the story of a person with a disability who also has a need for sexual companionship it was life-changing, not only for other people but for us as well. It was a game changer for our careers, but it was a story that really resonated with us. Ben had polio as a child. I think he immediately related to that sense of being marginalised and not seen as somebody who might want to have a sort of a sexual life, and that really it set off a sort of a trajectory of different things. But if I can do that with more films and not just that one film, then that's just it's I don't know, it's everything. It's an ice cream with the cherries and the cream and the whole kit and caboodle. And I think with How to Please a Woman, we've done a similar thing, in that there are many women out there who are saying to us, I needed to hear this story. I needed to see my story on the screen. It's opened up conversations for us with our husbands. We've had stories about couples who have gone home after a screening, not even been able to talk in the car, but it's opened up dialogues for them. I think it's given not only men a sort of an insight that they could hear. Sometimes they don't hear their wives or their friends or whatever when they're saying things. It just sort of, but to see it on a big screen in a fun situation helps them absorb that and learn a little bit about what might be, and people are going back to sort of, saying let's get back on the horse, let's reopen the intimacy in our relationships. So, and it's for everybody. It doesn't have to be, just purely heterosexual relationships. It's relevant to everyone, and I guess anyone who's had bad sex is gonna get it, basically, and a lot of women, especially, as I said, young women are really going for it in a way we didn't expect. But I think it helps them to know that they can be more open with their partners in the future.
Some moments out loud that you want to cheer during this film, from my experience, and that's from a guy seeing it. I was like, oh, thank God that was said. Kind of changing, just since you mentioned that you're now getting to go back and forth from Australia to LA, and you guys have lived in LA forever. What do you miss most about Australia when you're here in LA, and what do you miss about LA when you're back home?
Well, it's interesting because if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, I think it would have been a much shorter answer, and I'll try and keep this short. But I just spent 2 years back in Australia because of COVID, basically, and I was fortunate enough to be finishing one film, Falling for Figaro, in 2020, and then we rolled into How to Please a Woman in 2021, which might be a once in a lifetime to do 2 features back to back like that. But it gave me 2 years there to really sort of reconnect with a lot of things in Australia that I hadn't ever forgotten about. I think, you can take the girl out of Australia, but you can't take Australia out of the girl. I feel intrinsically Australian, even though my kids have all grown up in the US, and I feel like I belong in both places and always will. There's an ease of conversation with Australians that I have that I missed a lot when I was first settling into the US, and it took quite a while. I didn't come to America to meet Australians and hang out with Australians, but after about 10 years that sort of evolved organically through people I met, and there was a sort of a big exhale of, oh, this is so easy, it's so easy to hang out around the table and they get my jokes and they know all my references. But then when I'm in Australia and I'm listening to all of the news that's coming out of the US, and there is a lot of it and has been for quite a while lately, then everything is so familiar to me that I'm like, I can tell that people in the room don't, places will get mentioned that they don't know, and references to the political structure here or whatever the case might be, that is also second nature to me. I think it's a little hard to define, but I feel comfortable in both places. What do I miss about the US and LA? There is an energy there that you don't have quite the same way in Australia in the entertainment field, in that yes, those of us in it are kind of immersed, but no one else gets it, and it's so small that in most cases they don't know anything about who does what on a film. Actors will always complain that if they say they're an actor, then people will say, yeah, but what do you really do, kind of that sort of thing, whereas they come to LA or they come to America and they say they're an actor and you don't get anything else. I mean, you might get a joke about which restaurant do they work in, but that's more about survival than, that can't possibly be a real career. So I miss that energy that you just have everywhere, the kind of go get 'em. There is that in Australia, as I mentioned, but it's much smaller, and everywhere you go here, there are people who understand the entertainment business because they're so exposed to it. So that's good. And then I miss a lot of things on a personal level. I mean, I love Australia. I can hug the trees there and want to touch the ground, because I just feel like it's so historical and so beautiful and so expansive, and the colours are so extraordinary and the beaches are so incredible. And I live next to the beach in LA, but they're different, and I miss our friends that we've grown up with, but we have a great community in LA too, so it was lovely to come back and reconnect with all of that and be here and be able to jump on a plane and be in Bentonville. My co-workers on this film are not here with me because it's too hard to come all the way from Australia. It's costly, especially now, and it's it takes quite a chunk of time to factor all that in. So.
Well, thank you, first of all, for coming out here. Does mean the world. I'm curious, as a producer who does look to the creative side of things and does look towards the material, is there a filmmaker that you would love to work with if you could just kind of handpick a filmmaker to help bring their next story to life, someone that you have enjoyed their work or just feel that you would connect with what you've been able to do?
I like the work that Olivia Wilde is doing at the moment, and if I'm going to get her name correct, it's Christine Vachon, I think, who did Go Fish, and then a whole lot of terrific films after that. I've read her work. I haven't had a chance to meet her. I've got kind of like 2 degrees of separation, but I think she'd be terrific to work with. I just like her sensibilities for material. Who else is out there that I'd really love to work with? there are some terrific actors out there, but I'm casting all the time, and if I get a chance to keep working with great actors, then I've had the opportunity to work with some really extraordinary people. And I mean, John Hawkes was one of them in the sessions. Phenomenal. I would work with John again in a heartbeat. They all were. The cast were fantastic on that film. Worked with a lot of people on Catcher Was a Spy, Paul Rudd, Paul Giamatti, the list went on, and that was, I love working with great cast, because they really, they're bringing your film to life, and they have a craft and a skill and in many cases a gift to just surprise you with what they can do in a performance. I'm often quite blown away by that. So I suppose in some ways there are actors that I would look to before I'm looking necessarily at other directors. But I'm looking forward to continuing to work with other directors. I loved working with Renee, and I'm totally open to that. I'm not wedded to working on films with just my husband.
Poor Ben.
Poor Ben.
Well, that screams to the next question and kind of my final question. What's down the pipeline for you, Judi? What are you working on now, delving into? And anything you can share with us, if you can. Sometimes you can't.
No, I actually have a very full slate. I've spent a lot of the last sort of 6 or 8 years developing projects in Australia and here. So now I'm back in development hell, even with 2 films out there. I'm back in development hell. The next few things that are likely to take off, one is a documentary about a group of Aboriginal teens who actually saved up to come to Hollywood 20 years ago. And I filmed with them then, and now I'm going back to film with them, and they're adults with kids of their own. They went back as teenagers and became mentors for their siblings and the community, and that was really, it changed that community. It's a small community in far north Queensland, and now I'm going back later this year to interview them again. I've stayed in touch with that community, so this has been a passion project that's been sitting in the wings for about 20 years before I got to a place where I felt I could put it together again and take off. So that's happening. And Ben and I are working on a project called Sylvia and the President, which is a feature film about a 21-year-old kick-ass woman from the 1930s in New York who had polio and was part of establishing the League of the Physically Handicapped. That's what they called themselves. And they fought for the rights for people with disabilities to get jobs when Roosevelt was hiding the fact that he was a president with a disability. And they had a program called the Works Program designed to give people jobs after the Depression, and they refused to give jobs to people with disabilities. They described them as unemployable. So it's about that league and this woman, Sylvia Flexer, and that's got some momentum at the moment. We're just starting to cast that. And I have another project about a composer in Australia called Percy Granger, who was also around in the earlier part of the 20th century and was at one point the greatest pianist in the world. No one's ever heard of him, of course. Had a very unusual relationship with his mother and his wife. So it's about that story. It's really it's a triangle story. It's not a biopic about Percy, so to speak. So those are the 3 main ones. I have a series. I have a terrific documentary about a filmmaker that nobody here knows about called Ida Lupino, who was a young starlet in the 30s and 40s who became a director in the 50s. She directed 8 feature films. She did films about subjects no one was touching: rape, bigamy, abortion, disability. She did a cornerstone noir film called The Hitchhiker, and then she did hundreds of hours of television, including Have Gun Will Travel and Twilight Zone and Hitchcock Hour. I think she's the only woman to have directed herself in an episode of Twilight Zone. She went to the DGA, the Directors Guild, after she'd done a lot of this work to ask to become a member. Only the second woman director to be a member after Dorothy Arzno, which was 10 years earlier. And when Ida went there and said, "I'd like to be a member," they said, "Well, what have you done?" And she said, "Oh, well, 8 feature films and hundreds of hours of television." They didn't even know she was out there doing all that work, and then she now has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and still nobody knows anything about her. So that's a project I'm very excited about. That's here in the US, and I'm trying to get the momentum up again on that after COVID, and we moving forward with doing interviews and raising finance.
Gosh, I can't wait, Judi.
So a lot, yeah.
Definitely. Well, wish you the best. And one of the films that got me into loving film was We Were Warriors, which I think encompasses that Australian Kiwi love. So thank you, and thank your people.
Thank you very much, and that's a terrific film. We Were Warriors was a fantastic film, and we're thrilled to have you guys giving attention to everything that's going on in Bentonville, because people need to know about it. I'm a little surprised, maybe offline, that my Uber drivers all say they don't know there's a festival on.
Well, there's definitely one, and Gina will be here tonight. So, Judi, thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And yes, please keep making films and make more.
Thanks very much, Gadi. It's been a pleasure.